Hey YouTubers, this is Old John. Today I'm going to work on my 10-inch Remington pole saw. It has an extension that goes on it so you can reach up into trees and trim branches. It's considered a 10-inch saw because the dimension from here to the end is 10 inches. That's the way you determine the length of it, because that's the actual cutting portion. So I'm going to take it apart, clean it, and then try to sharpen the saw. And I'm new to this, but basically you're using a round file and you have to determine what that size should be, and I'll give you some clues on that. My saw is an Oregon. There's a place to go to find that if you don't have a manual. And then you also need a depth gauge tool to determine the depth gauges after you've sharpened. Well, they need to be filed. And then there's a nice little flat file I got that came with the gauge to be used. So we'll do that later. Set those aside for now. Okay, I've got the chain fairly cleaned. Let's just go over some of the parts before we put it back on and try to sharpen. Here's a picture out of the manual. And as you can see in this manual, there's a groove and there's a top plate. And that would be looking at here. There's your groove and there's your top plate. And there's one on the fourth link. And then on the other side, you have the same thing. So you have two sides to your chain. This is the groove to actually sharpen. And then the top plate. Which is represented by this figure here. It's the top plate and the groove. So that's where you're going to be doing your sharpening. That's on the right side. This is the left side. Your groove and your top plate. And this part of the groove is called the depth gauge. That's right here also. And that's where you use the flat gauge tool. Once you do your sharpening, you place this tool. Mine's at 0.66 millimeters or 0.025 inches. And that's determined from your specs on your saw. If you notice 0.025 here, we got to maintain this height here, and that's what this does when you place it over the chains. And the chain, of course, goes on like this, with this to the front, with the edges curving this way. And these are your bottom, or they're called guides, that fit in the groove. And mine has a 91 on them. So if they're not too worn, you might actually see a number here. So now we're ready to put the chain back on and then attempt to sharpen it.
Okay, as I mentioned before, now that we put the chainsaw back together, if you have an Oregon saw, here's a website you can go to determine more specs on it, specifically as to the size of sharpening file you need. You go to OregonProducts.com, and then there you'll go to the Pro location and then lookups, parts lookups right here, bar and chain selector guide, and then you simply in the first column look for your brand. Mine's a Remington. Then you can look for the actual product itself, and this is mine right here. Then you have to select the bar length. This is a nice site. If you hover over each area, it tells you what it wants in more detail. Select the bar length. In my case, it's a 10-inch. And then it's considered 3/8 inch chainsaw, and that's on the chainsaw itself. And then the gap between the guide bar, and mine's 0.050, and then you click here for parts, and then it shows you details on the chain and dimensions on these drive links. As I said, mine's chain pitch is 3/8. This is the distance between the grooves on the guide bar. That's the drive socket. Then here it tells you the diameter of the sharpening file, and mine's a 5/32. So I think by using this page you can pretty much determine what you need as far as your file size, and then purchase accordingly.
Okay, we're going to file the chain now. Have it mounted in a vise, and we need to mark it so as we turn it and do areas we know where we were at. So I'm going to use some kind of marking device. I'm just going to show the basics here, so I'm not going to do that at this moment. I'm using this special file that has a plate on it that gives you angles of what you want to file, gives you the size. Mine's a 5/32. I'll give you a link to the Oregon site to determine what these need to be if you don't have a manual. My manual shows it. I'm using a 5/32 diameter file, and I'm supposed to do it at 30 degrees. There's a 30-degree line on here, so we line it up with the 30 degrees, and you want to push towards the front in that direction, not pull but push, like so, maintaining the 30-degree angle. and you do the ones on one side only. And we want to check the gauge, the depth gauge, height. So you place this over. The goal is for this to be level on top. If it's not, you do some filing. Looks like that's pretty close already. Just filing that top curve, maintaining a 0.025 inch clearance from this surface to here. I've noticed these top plates have grooves on them where it's not too worn, which shows you the angle that you're supposed to file on, which matches up for the 30. So that's another thing to look for. That gives you your angle. That matches up for 30 degrees. So those are the basics of how you sharpen your saw. Pretty simple, especially if you have the right tools. Do it 3 or 4 times. And then of course to do the other side, the left side, we want to change our file to the other side. Go like so. It was pretty rough. Maintaining the 30-degree angle. Pushing towards the front and not pulling. That one's pretty rough. Like so. Looks good, YouTubers.